Welcome to the Ag Innovation News Podcast, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. I'm your host, Jamie Dickerman. Guests on this podcast shed light on innovations and value-added agriculture, highlighting important voices and work that's being done throughout Minnesota's ag sector, and educate the public about resources and organizations that support Minnesota agriculture. On today's podcast, we'll be visiting with Jeff Grev. He's an AURI board member and former vice president of legislative affairs of Hormel Foods. Jeff, to get us started, talk a little bit about yourself. Give us a little bit of a background on you and who you are.
Yeah, Jamie, I'm a native of Shakopee, Minnesota. I'm a graduate of the University of Minnesota Business School and also St. Thomas University with an MBA. I just completed a 40-year and 2-day career with Hormel Foods. I started working with them right out of the University of Minnesota back in 1984. So that goes back there a little ways. And I did a number of things. You might ask, why is a guy, talking about legislative affairs on a innovation podcast? And that's because I did a number of things with Hormel for about the first 20 years. I was directly involved in sales and primarily marketing and a lot of innovation efforts at Hormel. And then for about 10 years, I was involved in business acquisitions and business development. And then for about the last 10, I was involved in legislative affairs, which brings into play a lot of different topics. So that's a quick review.
Like a thumbnail of a pretty impressive 40-year career. 40 years with one company is pretty amazing. And a company like Hormel Foods, I would imagine a lot changed from when you started to when you walked away from there. I can't even imagine how many different things have changed. But talk a little bit about the change that you saw.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of things that changed because when you think about it, back when I started with the company was only approaching $1.5 billion in sales. Now it is $12 billion in sales and has added many, many brands. Hormel is, to a lot of people known as a meat company, but in fact, it's really quite a extensive collection of food brands, including things like Skippy peanut butter and Holy guacamole, and a number of different brands, Herdez Mexican sauces. It's just really expanded and gotten a lot bigger over those years.
Well, and everybody of course knows Spam, and I can remember a number of years ago when I was doing a morning radio show. I can remember interviewing someone about Spam, and they sent me this huge package of promotional items. I got all these crazy different flavors of Spam that I didn't even know existed. So I still have my Spam pencil over here someplace.
I think the tally is something like 16 or 17 different flavor varieties of Spam now. So it really has become, even more popular and relevant to more and more people with some of these different specific flavors that have come on.
Well, and you look at it, talking about that kind of thing, consumer purchasing patterns and how, they change and how that impacts food companies like a Hormel. I mean, it's a major impact.
Yeah, one thing I would highlight is one thing that I thought about when you brought about 40 years is, back in the 1980s, there wasn't even a nutritional panel on food products. And you had an ingredient statement, but people really didn't know what was in there. And in 1990, there was the Nutritional Labeling Act that Congress put through. And so that made people pay a lot more attention to nutrition. Now, some pay more attention than others, obviously, and a lot of people don't look at a nutritional panel, but a lot of people do. And that's become more and more relevant, has really driven a lot of development because when people see those different nutritional facts, it might influence how people source the ingredients in their products and exactly how they formulate different things.
Well, and, being in a career like this for as long as you were, you saw a whole bunch of different, I'm sure, entrepreneurial ideas in that food space, in that food sector during your time. So what, if you had to say, what were the things that made certain ideas successful? Like what were some keys that made things work?
Yeah, I'm kind of a back to the basics guy when it comes to it. And one of the key things that people don't think about, and it kind of ties into AURI and what they do is that a lot of times the margin that your product is able to gain from the consumer, in other words, what your cost of production is versus what you're able to sell it for, people often underestimate what that margin needs to be. What I'm talking about is just the cost of making the product versus, then you have to market it, you have to distribute it, you have to deal with the retailers, you have to do all that. So when you look at your gross margin, you need to make sure you have a very healthy margin if you're going to be able to compete and deal with all the costs and marketing expenses and things like that you're going to run into in the marketplace. Other things that may sound basic, but I'll mention them are, just things like reading the trends and being aware of what the different consumer segments are interested in, because that does evolve and that does change. And people are always looking for something new in the food space. So when there's a new ingredient or a new buzzword around a specific benefit of a product, you'll see usually a number of people jump in and get involved, and that's because they've been paying attention to, what's going on in those trends and what people are expressing interest in.
So paying attention to trends, really a key thing to do. And if you were going to give somebody advice, if you're a food entrepreneur and you want to get your products in retail markets, you want to get them on shelf, uh, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think you really have to buckle up your seatbelt and understand that there's a lot of hurdles you're going to have to clear. So you can do some smaller scale things and sell the product yourself, and go to fairs and markets and be the feet on the ground that really promotes your product. But if you're going to be successful, you're really going to need to have some stick with itness when it comes to bringing those products out and making them successful. A lot of things that one thing I should say that people underestimate is the basic packaging you use for your product. When you put a product into the marketplace, nobody knows your product. Nobody's seen your product. The only thing they see is your package. They see how you packaged it, what the type of package is, what the graphics are, what the things that you have highlighted on the package say about your product. So, when you think about it, that's extremely important. And when you look at the success of new products, I always like to bring up the fact that, there's awareness of your product and then there's the repeat of your product. So you need to generate awareness. You might be able to do that through some modest advertising if you're a small player, but you probably are going to do it through sampling your product, maybe being in stores, giving it to the people so they can taste it. Then they become aware of your product. They're going to sample it. Then the question is, do they buy it? And then what percentage of those customers, based on that first experience, are going to come back and repeat purchase? So it's often referred to just as, awareness and repeat. And, awareness is very difficult to come by. I'll jump back to that comment I made on packaging. A lot of times people will have heard nothing about your product. So how it's presented in the store is extremely crucial, whether it's just on the shelf or hopefully you're able to get it on a display, or maybe in an advertisement, connected to a supermarket or whatever the case may be.
I'm curious to think, I mean, this is the AURI, Ag Innovation podcast. So question about that, an established company like Hormel, uh, or other corporations, small businesses in startup mode, how do you benefit from having regular engagement with AURI?
I think you want to surround yourself with people who are thinking innovation and are thinking, how do we make more money out of different products? I mean, I'm going to jump back to, you mentioned spam earlier. Spam really came about because they had a lot of excess pork shoulder. People were buying hams, and that was a very popular item. But pork shoulder was an undervalued. It wasn't really it's a co-product of making the hams and having the whole pig. So they took those pork shoulder pieces and came up with the spam recipe and came up with a really successful brand that's lasted the test of time. So when you're thinking about what you do or how it comes about, that whole co-product byproduct thing really is crucial. I mean, another one I'll give you that's a quick example from my background that I was a brand manager on was a product like Hormel bacon bits and pieces. we were one of the very first companies to come out with bacon bits and pieces. And the reason is that you have a lot of imperfect slices. You have ends and pieces of bacon that don't get the same value that sliced bacon has come up with. So we came up with the idea of let's, market a topping that takes advantage of that ingredient, and has become so popular that they really, I mean, a number of companies obviously are making it now. It's become so popular that they can't just do it with regular bacon ends and pieces. They have to use, some really nice bacon or other ingredients to make what ends up being bacon ends and pieces. So, um, just another example of how that kind of co-product, what can we do with these products? You see it all across agriculture with different things that happen. Hemp is a great example where you have hemp hearts, you have the herd that's used as a bedding for a lot of chickens and things like that, and they have the fibers that's used for insulation and twine and rope and things like that. So it's like, how do you take all those pieces and really maximize the value of all of them and make use of all of them? Because obviously you don't want to, everybody wants to be efficient, wants to be environmentally friendly, and you don't want to throw, anything away. So, I mean, thinking about it in that regard often leads to innovation. It's not just using things up all the time. I'm probably oversimplifying it there, but I think you get the idea of what I'm talking about.
And having an open mind and the collaboration between and getting good ideas. I mean, you always have to be open to that. And I think, talking about what you're talking about, those are great success stories of, something you weren't going to use or you didn't know you needed a use for it, and it came up and it became almost a bigger product than you originally had to start with.
And circling back to your original question, I think was, why do you want to associate with the AURI? They've got a group of people that is their mode of thinking. That is what they're focused on. They're looking for new ideas. They're looking for ways to use products in a better way, to not waste anything, to, get more value out of it. So they're on that full time. They've got people that have dealt with a lot of different entrepreneurs, help them develop their game plans, and are going to be able to check off the boxes of helping some of these entrepreneurs not make common mistakes or maximize what they're able to achieve and things along those lines. So it's really about, hang around with the people that are like you want to be, and every company wants to be a better innovator because innovation leads to more dollar sales. And as new products come into the market, there's always that competition. There's only that food basket of so much product people can buy. So if you've got a new product, you've kind of got to replace something that's out there in that consumer food basket. So you've really got to be smart about what your product benefits are and why somebody's going to buy your improved product or your product that may take the place of something that consumers are already consuming.
So, in looking at top challenges facing food industry, agriculture industry too, um, if you look at top challenges and what you think they might be, were those things that you thought about in the past? I mean, obviously everything's evolving, so things are changing, but your thoughts on
Rolling
that?
back, yeah, rolling back the clock. I mean, the one that comes right immediately to mind is all this chatter that's come about on processed foods in the last probably 5 years primarily, but it goes back further than that. But the whole idea of processed foods good. So that's a thing that you need to kind of think about and kind of overcome that objection and make sure that those processed foods are as healthy and as good as they can be, which is the goal of every company. Everybody wants to do it as well as they can and give the consuming public the best products that they're able to do. Um, so when you think about what's really important in that regard of food processing, one, when you roll back the clock, this is a very general statement, but things were very simple 100 years ago in the foods we ate. They were not able to ship and transport and feed people in big cities as efficiently as we are today. A lot of the food processing, was connected to having some amount of shelf life and preservation, so that there wasn't food waste. Number one, and number two, so that they could get it to all the locations where people needed the food and wanted to consume it and had it available, on a moment's notice. Which, if you're going to do everything unprocessed, that's virtually impossible. So you just really have to think about minimizing how much processing goes on, minimize any non-natural ingredients and make the product as healthy as possible, but still being able to feed that food distribution chain that's got to travel all over the country and get product to all these different folks that otherwise don't have it. They can't go into their backyard and get some people can now, but not everybody can go get a dozen eggs out of their backyard, or they can't get the dairy products they need, or they can't get the meat products they need. I mean, it's just it's got to be a balancing act of doing it very effectively as far as the health elements are concerned, but then also realizing that there's got to be some efficiency here and getting these products out to all the people that need them.
Well, I think in the agriculture sector, obviously, one thing that you hear about a lot, and people, I think, more now than ever, they want to know where their food comes from. They want to know exactly where it comes from and how it's getting to them. What are the steps that it's going through before it gets to their table. And one thing I think is key is when agriculture, whether we're talking about, beef, pork, whatever we're talking about, that the story gets told, because the more people know and understand it, the less false information can come in and give people the wrong idea of how things are being processed. And I know in a situation like Hormel, I don't know if you dealt with that a lot, but with falsehoods or things coming out that weren't exactly true, groups that like to do that, and it's important to be able to tell your story efficiently and know exactly, here's how we're doing it. That's not true. Get the truth out there.
You're absolutely right. And in today's world, all it takes is a few social media posts and things can get rolling in a really negative direction. And, as I mentioned earlier, it's not the goal. It would not be, it's not good business to put out bad food. If you put out bad food, people either maybe they're going to get sick, it's not going to taste good. The whole idea that anybody wants to put out unhealthy or uh, bad food. Is kind of ridiculous because it would go against the whole reason you've got a company producing these products. You're there, obviously, it's a capitalist market. You're there to make some money, but you're not going to put bad stuff out there because it's not gonna work for you in the long term in the food business.
You're also on the board of directors, AURI. What made you get involved with AURI?
Well, I as I mentioned earlier, I've had a number of different roles over my recently concluded career, but the thing that always really excited me in my major in college, going way back to that time, was marketing, and I always found it really intriguing to try to develop a product or find something that people would buy that you were able to, you know, do in a profitable way. And um, AURI is really all about that, and it's about helping, especially smaller guys and gals who are getting into business, develop their products and get them going. But the thing is, it's really forward thinking by the state of Minnesota, I think, to have this availability of these resources out there because yes, it's probably more focused on the smaller, newer people, which they often need the most help. They don't have the resources, but it's also bigger companies like a Hormel or a General Mills or anybody can benefit from some of the learnings that AURI has and some of the things that they put together, some of the capabilities they have in their labs to do testing and initial workup of products and things like that. So it really kind of spans a very wide spectrum of people that can benefit from having these scientists. And also, I really want to emphasize it's not just science and R&D and product development, it's understanding what these new entrepreneurs go through when they're trying to get a new product rolling. So it's kind of a little bit of I don't want to call it consulting because they're not really consulting, but they can give them some good advice and keep them out of a lot of trouble and get them headed right. more down a good path, maybe make some connections for them. That would be a lot harder for them to make if they didn't already know who a potential co-manufacturer might be, or whatever the case might involve. So, I mean, I just look at it as something I enjoy and something I can learn some things along the way too when we're dealing with a lot of these different folks. So I'm kind of on the mode of wanting to be a continuing learner, and I think there's a lot of learning everybody can get through getting together and sharing thoughts and ideas in some of these areas.
Talk a little bit about what AURI brings to the agriculture industry and what the value is for ag.
Well, I think it's really taking agriculture's products and finding ways to add more value. It's looking at things like, there's taking basic crops and turning them into food products. There's ideas like taking soybean oil and using that as a road sealant, perhaps. There's just a wide array of places that you can use some of these products, that some of which you don't naturally, think of, but they can also be sometimes more environmentally friendly ideas. The soybean oil might be a example of that. Some things that might be more environmentally friendly, like cover crops, things like that, that help ag, keep soil health where everybody wants it to be. So there's really a wide array of ways that it benefits agriculture and adds, usage, and adds, the ultimate value that some of these crops and co-products and byproducts end up being valued at out there in the marketplace.
So, anything else that you would like to share with the audience at all while we have the time? Anything else that you'd like to bring up while we're chatting?
I just really encourage anybody out there who is involved in a small food business or agriculture to, look up AURI and understand what they do and understand how they're benefiting the state of Minnesota, and helping develop business that, generates income and benefits to a lot of the folks across the state. I mean, if you have an interest, it's a great way to learn about ag innovation.
Jeff, it's been awesome talking with you. Thanks so much for being a part of the podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Jamie. Don't forget to try that new flavor of Spam, and Spam Museum features them all down in Austin, Minnesota. Stop in next time you're driving I-90 in the southeast part of the state.
Before you go, do you have a favorite flavor that you'd recommend?
I do. It's hot and spicy Spam. It uses a Tabasco pepper dry
Oh,
seasoning. If you like Tabasco, you will really enjoy that. And if you like foods that are a little hotter, I would highly recommend that one. But they're all good, but that's my favorite.
perfect. Jeff, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Jamie.
This has been the Ag Innovation News Podcast, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota.